In 1887, a woman went to the doctor complaining of pain in her left side. The doctor examined her and gave her shocking news. She was pregnant. The woman wasn't surprised to be pregnant. She was married. She'd been trying to have a baby. What shocked her was which side the pregnancy was on. "The left side?" she said. "That's strange. We usually use the right." The doctor stared at her, confused, and then the full implications of what she'd just said hit him. Because Myrtle Corbin wasn't a normal woman. From the waist down, she had two complete sets of everything. Two pelvises. Two reproductive systems. 4 legs. And when she said, "We usually use the right," she meant that she and her husband had a choice about which side of her body they used during sex. The left side was pregnant, but they usually used the right, which meant Myrtle Corbin had just casually revealed one of the most intimate details of her marriage to a doctor who was trying very hard not to faint. This is the story of Josephine Myrtle Corbin, the 4-legged woman who became one of the most famous sideshow performers in American history, who married for love, who gave birth to 7 children, and whose body was so valuable that when she died, her family had to encase her coffin in concrete to keep grave robbers from stealing it. May 12, 1868, Lincoln County, Tennessee. A woman was about to give birth, and the doctors attending her were already nervous. Why? Because the parents looked too similar. The mother and father both had striking auburn hair, fair complexions, and identical blue eyes. The doctors suspected they might be relatives, maybe cousins, and in the 1860s, that raised fears of genetic abnormalities in the child. So the doctors prepared themselves for a potentially unusual delivery. But nothing could have prepared them for what happened next. The delivery itself was completely normal, no complications. The mother pushed. The baby emerged. Everything seemed fine. And then the doctors looked at the baby. The child had 4 legs. Not deformed legs, not fused limbs. 4 separate, distinct legs. 2 strong ones on the outside, and 2 smaller, weaker ones hanging between them. The doctors were in shock. They had never seen anything like this. No one had. The condition is called Dipygus, an extremely rare congenital disorder where a person develops 2 pelvises. It occurs in roughly 1 in a million births. And in Myrtle Corbin's case, the duplication extended from her waist down. She had 2 pelvises, 2 sets of hips, 2 complete reproductive systems, 4 legs. The doctors scrambled to explain what had happened. Their first theory, that the parents were related, was quickly disproven. Their second theory was that the mother was significantly older than the father, and somehow that had caused the abnormality. Then a third, even more bizarre theory emerged, that Myrtle had started as twins in the womb, but only one twin developed fully. The other twin, her sister, had only developed from the waist down, creating the appearance of extra legs. None of these theories were correct. But in 1868, no one really understood genetics well enough to know that. What the doctors did agree on was this. If Myrtle had been in a breech position during birth, the delivery would have been fatal, both for her and possibly for her mother. Her unusual proportions would have made it impossible. But there was good news, too. Despite her shocking appearance, Myrtle was a healthy baby. She was thriving. Nursing well. At 3 weeks old, she weighed 10 pounds, a good size for a newborn. Everything from the waist up was perfectly normal. From the waist down, however, things were complicated. Myrtle didn't have 4 regular-sized legs. She had 2 strong outer legs, the ones she would eventually use for walking, and 2 smaller, weaker inner legs that hung between them, slightly off to the sides. The inner legs were much shorter. They had only 3 toes each, and they never developed enough strength to support her weight. But here's where it got really complicated. The pairing didn't make sense. You'd think the strong left leg would pair with the weak left leg, and the strong right leg would pair with the weak right leg. But that's not what happened. Instead, each strong leg's partner was one of the weaker legs from the opposite side. The legs crossed over in a way that made walking extremely difficult. And to make matters worse, Myrtle's right outer leg, one of the strong ones, had a club foot. It pointed inward, making it even harder for her to walk properly. From birth, Myrtle Corbin's body was a medical puzzle, and the medical community wasted no time dissecting that puzzle in the most invasive, degrading ways possible. Doctors began publishing detailed articles about her. Not to help her, not to understand her condition for compassionate reasons, but to describe her in the most sensational, dehumanizing terms possible. Dr. Brooks H. Wells wrote that Myrtle belonged to the class of monsters by fusion. Dr. Joseph Jones called her a living monstrosity. And that wasn't even the worst of it. These doctors, men of science, supposedly educated and ethical, began publishing intimate details about Myrtle's body. They described exactly what her anatomy looked like between her legs. They explained how she went to the bathroom. They violated every possible boundary of privacy and decency. And Myrtle was just a baby. But the public ate it up. Articles about the four-legged girl spread across the country. People were fascinated, horrified, curious. Myrtle became a national sensation before she could even walk. And that's when her father had an idea. When Myrtle was just 5 weeks old, her father, William Corbin, made a decision that would define the rest of her life. He invited neighbors over to the house, charged them a small fee, and let them stare at his daughter's legs. The neighbors came. They paid. They gawked. And William Corbin made money. A lot of money. When the local neighbors had all paid and seen enough, William took his idea to the next level. He placed advertisements in newspapers showing a drawing of baby Myrtle sitting in a high chair with her mother standing beside her. The baby was wearing a short dress that clearly displayed all four legs. The public went absolutely crazy. Myrtle became a national celebrity, and William Corbin became a showman. He moved the family to Blount County, Tennessee, and began touring with Myrtle, taking her to sideshows and fairs across the country, charging admission for people to see the four-legged girl. It sounds exploitative, and it was. But here's the uncomfortable truth. The Corbin family was poor. They needed money, and Myrtle's unusual body was the only asset they had. So William Corbin did what many desperate parents in the 19th century did when their children had marketable abnormalities. He put her to work. The weeks turned into months. The months turned into years. And Myrtle spent her entire childhood being stared at. Then, when she was still young, she caught the attention of the most famous showman in America, P.T. Barnum. P.T. Barnum was a showman, a philanthropist, a politician, and a scammer. He was famous for his circus, his museum of curiosities, and his ruthless business tactics. He allegedly coined the phrase, "There's a sucker born every minute." And he built an empire by exploiting people's fascination with the unusual. Barnum's freak shows featured people with dwarfism, gigantism, physical deformities, anyone whose body deviated from the norm. He marketed them as wonders of nature and made a fortune. When Barnum heard about Myrtle Corbin, he knew he had to have her. He met with Myrtle and her father, and he was immediately impressed, not just by her four legs, but by her personality. Myrtle wasn't a shy, sad child. She was upbeat, positive, and charismatic. She could work a crowd. She had star quality. Barnum made an offer. You'd think William Corbin, a naive farmer with no business experience, would get steamrolled by the ruthless Barnum. But surprisingly, William negotiated a very good deal. Myrtle's weekly salary? $250. That's equivalent to $7,000 in today's money. For a young girl in the 1870s, that was an enormous sum. More than most men earned. Certainly more than her father could ever make farming. So Myrtle went to work for P.T. Barnum, and her life became a strange mix of fame, exploitation, and survival. Myrtle's act was simple. She would walk onto the stage wearing a long skirt that hid her legs. The only hint of anything unusual was that her hips looked wide for her body, and she walked with a slight limp. Then she would sit down and slowly, dramatically, pull up her skirt. When the audience saw her 4 legs, they gasped, screamed, stared, and Myrtle collected her paycheck. It sounds easy, but life as one of Barnum's performers was far from glamorous. Barnum was known for his brutal treatment of performers, both animal and human. He used torturous methods to train elephants, literally burning them to make them obey. And he wasn't much kinder to his human freaks. One of Barnum's most famous performers was a man with microcephaly, a condition that caused his head to be smaller at the top. Barnum named him Zip the Pinhead, billed him as "What is it?" and displayed him in a cage with monkeys, suggesting he was the missing link between humans and apes. It was degrading, dehumanizing, cruel. Myrtle survived it, but as she grew older, she started to realize something painful. She was tired of being stared at, tired of being treated like a curiosity instead of a person. And most painfully, she had to watch as her younger sister, Willie Ann, did normal things. Go on dates, plan a wedding, live a life that Myrtle assumed would never be possible for her. But then something unexpected happened. Myrtle Corbin fell in love. Finding love was complicated for Myrtle. She was educated, cultured, musically talented, and, with her enormous salary, quite wealthy. On paper, she was a catch. But she had 4 legs. And in the 1880s, that was a deal-breaker for most men. The few men who did show romantic interest in her were immediately suspect. Were they genuinely attracted to her, or were they after her money? Myrtle had no way to know, so she kept them all at arm's length. Then, in 1885, her younger sister Willie Ann got engaged to a man named Hamilton Bicknell. And Hamilton had a brother. James Clinton Bicknell was about to become a doctor. He didn't need Myrtle's freak show money. He had his own career, his own prospects, his own life. And he was interested in Myrtle. Not because of her legs, not because of her fame, but because he genuinely liked her. 6 months after her sister's wedding, Myrtle and James got married. And Myrtle retired from the freak show business. She was done being stared at. Done being called a monster. She was going to be a wife, and hopefully, a mother. But there was a problem. As soon as Myrtle retired, other women started appearing in sideshows claiming to be 4-legged women. Suddenly, there was an epidemic of women with her exact condition, except they were all fakes. They attached fake limbs between their real legs and toured as cheap imitations of Myrtle Corbin. Myrtle didn't care. She had bigger concerns. About a year after her wedding, she started feeling sick, fever, headaches, pain in her left side. Her doctor examined her and delivered news that most women would be thrilled to hear. Myrtle was pregnant. But then came the detail that shocked everyone. The pregnancy was on her left side. When the doctor told Myrtle she was pregnant on the left side, her response caught him completely off guard. "The left," she said. "That's strange. We usually use the right." The doctor stared at her, processing what she'd just said. Because of Myrtle's condition, 2 complete pelvises, 2 reproductive systems, she and her husband had a choice about which side they used during intercourse. Apparently, they usually used the right side. But the left side was the one that was pregnant. The doctor was stunned. This was one of the most intimate revelations he'd ever heard from a patient, and Myrtle had just mentioned it casually, as though it were the most normal thing in the world. But the novelty of the situation quickly gave way to fear. No one with Myrtle's condition had ever given birth before. There was no medical precedent, no way to know if her body could handle it. For weeks, Myrtle's pregnancy progressed normally. Then she started getting sicker. The fever got worse. The pain intensified. Her doctor examined her again, and he made a devastating call. 8 weeks into the pregnancy, he decided they had to terminate it. Myrtle's life was at risk. The pregnancy had to end. Myrtle lost her first baby. And just like that, the public, who had mostly forgotten about her, became obsessed with her again. News of her pregnancy had leaked, and suddenly doctors around the world were writing about her in medical journals. But this time, the tone was different. Instead of calling her a monster or a freak, these new articles focused on what was normal about Myrtle. They described her as attractive, intelligent, capable of maintaining a household. For the first time, the medical community was treating her like a person. After the loss of her first pregnancy, Myrtle kept trying. And over the next several years, she gave birth to 7 children. Sadly, only 4 survived infancy. But she did it. She became a mother. She had a family. She lived the normal life she'd always wanted. And then, 20 years later, she made a shocking decision. In the early 1900s, after 2 decades of quiet family life, Myrtle Corbin returned to the stage. Why? No one knows for sure. Some speculate she and her husband had fallen on hard financial times. Others think she just missed the spotlight. Whatever the reason, Myrtle, now in her 40s, decided to lift her skirt again. But this time was different. There was no P.T. Barnum breathing down her neck, no exploitative contract, no one controlling her. Myrtle was in complete control of her own act. She made her own wardrobe decisions. She set her own schedule. She chose where she performed. And it worked. Her shows were instantly popular. She performed at Coney Island in New York, Riverview Park in Chicago, and even joined the Ringling Brothers Circus. Her weekly salary? $450, nearly double what Barnum had paid her as a young woman. Myrtle Corbin was back on top. But she had competition. A young Italian performer named Francesco Lentini had arrived in America with 3 legs, all of different sizes. He could kick a soccer ball with one leg and use another as a stool to sit on. He was young, athletic, charming. And he was stealing Myrtle's spotlight. After a few years, Myrtle retired again. This time, it would be permanent. In 1928, Myrtle developed a rash on her right leg. She called the doctor. He examined her and diagnosed a skin infection. Today, a simple course of antibiotics would cure it. But in 1928, there was no treatment. 1 week later, Myrtle Corbin was dead. She was 59 years old. Her family prepared to bury her. But they couldn't do a normal burial. They had to encase her coffin in concrete. And they had to have family members stand watch over the grave until the concrete hardened completely. Why? Because they were terrified of grave robbers. Myrtle's body was valuable. Scientists and collectors had already offered the family money to purchase her skeleton. It was, after all, one of a kind. So the family took extreme measures to protect her remains. The concrete worked. Myrtle's body was never stolen. She rests in peace in Tennessee, her grave unmarked to this day. But her legacy lives on. In 2015, poet Diane Seuss published a collection called 4-Legged Girl, inspired by Myrtle's life. Modern-day sideshow performers cite Myrtle as a pioneer who proved that people with unusual bodies could control their own narratives. And in 2021, someone found images of Myrtle being sold as Halloween decorations in a craft store. Proof that even in death, society still struggles to see her as fully human. Myrtle Corbin was a woman with 4 legs who lived in a world that saw her as a freak. But she was also a wife, a mother, a performer, and a survivor. She deserves to be remembered not for her legs, but for her life. If this story moved you, please subscribe. Every week we tell the forgotten stories of people who were exploited, marginalized, or treated as less than human, and who fought for dignity anyway. Leave a comment. Do you think Myrtle's return to performing in her 40s was empowering, or was it just more exploitation? Thank you for watching, and thank you for remembering Myrtle Corbin, not as a freak, but as a person.